Three men are standing in a space barely large enough for two of them to turn around, in air so hot and so thin that some of the sailors below them have already started passing out, and two of the three believe with total conviction that the war has already started and that the only correct response left to them is to fire a nuclear weapon at the ships circling above. The third man has 60 seconds, maybe less, to decide whether he agrees. He doesn't. Here's the number worth holding on to for the rest of this video. One vote, not one battle, not one negotiation. One vote cast by one man inside a machine specifically built so that no single person could ever make this decision alone. And that machine came within one dissenting voice of failing completely at the single most dangerous hour of the entire Cold War. Remember that number. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how close it came, what it actually felt like inside that submarine in the minutes before the vote, and, this is the part that should genuinely disturb you, exactly what his own Navy told him when he came home from making the right call. There's a file that stayed sealed for 40 years. Not because the story wasn't extraordinary, because it was too dangerous to the reputations of everyone else in the room. Hold on to that, too. It gets worse before this video is over. One detail before we go back. Notice his rank, Deputy Commander, not Captain. That detail means nothing to you yet. It's about to mean everything. To understand why one man's vote carried the weight it did, you need to understand what happened to him a year earlier, because the authority that put him in that room at that exact moment was built somewhere else entirely, in a disaster almost nobody outside the Soviet Navy was allowed to know about. Seda Bay on the Kola Peninsula, spring of 1961, a brand new class of vessel, the Soviet Navy's first nuclear-powered submarine, hull number K-19, a boat the sailors who serve on her have already started calling Hiroshima, half as dark joke, half as genuine premonition. During construction, a welder allows a bead of solder to drip onto a pipe carrying coolant to the reactor. The defect is invisible, microscopic, the kind of flaw that exists in thousands of welds across thousands of ships and never matters until the one time it does. Vasily Arkhipov is the deputy commander aboard K-19 on this patrol. The submarine is hiding from Soviet diesel subs during a training exercise, submerged, cut off, running a routine drill that is about to become anything but. The cracked pipe finally gives way. In the reactor compartment, the temperature climbs past what any gauge on the ship was built to register. The needle simply runs out of numbers to point to. Radiation levels are rising in step with it, and nobody on board has any reliable way of knowing exactly how fast. There is no backup cooling system. There is no way to radio Moscow. The long-range antenna is down. One number before you keep reading. The reactor's designers never built a way to cool it manually. Nobody thought a human being would ever need to. Captain Nikolai Zateyev has a decision with no good version inside it. Leave the reactor uncooled and it melts down. With a real possibility, it detonates the nuclear warheads the boat is carrying in the middle of the North Atlantic in a way that could read to anyone monitoring the region as an American first strike. He calls the crew together. He doesn't order anyone into the reactor compartment. He asks. 7 engineers step forward. Watch what they're actually holding when they go in, because this is the detail that should stop you. No lead shielding, no suits rated for this kind of exposure, standard issue work clothes, and a length of rubber hose meant for a completely different job, repurposed on the spot because nothing built for this moment exists on this boat. They go in wearing what a mechanic wears to fix a car engine, into a compartment already hot enough to blister skin through fabric. They work in 3-man rotations, 5 to 10 minutes at a time, the outer limit of what a human body can absorb of that room before it has to come back out. Between rotations, they build a secondary cooling system out of scavenged pipe fittings,
welding gear never designed for underwater repair, and whatever raw improvisation 7 frightened, exhausted men can manage with a submarine's worth of spare parts and no time to think twice. It works. The reactor stabilizes. The boat survives. Here's what stabilizing it actually cost, and it's worth sitting with the numbers slowly rather than all at once. All 7 of those engineers are dead within a month. Not from an explosion, not from anything sudden. Acute radiation sickness, a slow cellular unraveling the rest of the crew has to watch happen in the confined space of a submarine, with nowhere else on the boat to look to. Within 2 years, 15 more of the crew are gone from what they absorbed in those same minutes. Arkhipov himself takes a dose doctors will never be able to precisely measure, one that will, decades from now, be named as the cause of the cancer that finally kills him. The Soviet Union's response to this is one word: nothing. Before the Soviet Union collapses 30 decades later, K-19 is one of the most tightly guarded secrets in the entire Soviet military. Western intelligence hears fragments, rumors, nothing confirmed. The 7 men who walked into that reactor compartment, knowing, on some level, what it was likely to cost them, do not exist in any public account anywhere on Earth for 30 years. But inside the small, closed world of the Soviet submarine service, the handful of officers who actually know what happened on K-19, Arkipov's name means something now. He was there. He held steady when the boat was minutes from catastrophe. That reputation follows him quietly, unofficially, into a room where it's about to matter more than anyone, including him, could have predicted. October 27, 1962. 4 Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel submarines leave their base in Kola Bay, part of the broader Soviet military buildup toward Cuba that will trigger the most dangerous confrontation of the entire Cold War. Each boat is carrying something almost nobody outside a narrow circle of Soviet naval command knows about: a single nuclear-armed torpedo, comparable to the destructive force of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Not a comparison for effect, an actual, ready nuclear weapon on a diesel submarine in the middle of the most dangerous standoff the world has ever faced. Arkhipov is aboard one of them, submarine B-59, not as its commanding officer, but as chief of staff for the entire submarine brigade. That's the deputy commander's rank following him. Remember it. It's the detail from the opening of this video, and it is about to be the single most consequential fact in this entire story. Look at the other 3 commanders in this same flotilla for a moment, because their answer tells you exactly how unusual Arkipov's hesitation is about to be. Ryrik Kedov, commanding one of the sister submarines, later described his own standing orders in blunt terms. If the order came to fire, he would do it without a second thought. That was the culture. That was the training. Nikolai Shumkov and Alexei Dubivko, the 2 remaining commanders, operated under that same understanding. 4 men, 4 boats, 4 nuclear weapons, and a shared assumption that hesitation itself was the failure, not the launch. Nobody on these boats was chosen, trained, or expected to hesitate. Arkhipov is the only deviation from it, on the one boat where his rank happens to give that deviation the power to matter. By October 27th, B-59 has been submerged and pursued by American destroyers for hours. Internal temperatures have climbed past 50 degrees Celsius. Carbon dioxide levels inside the hull are high enough that crew members are losing consciousness at their stations. The boat has been cut off from Moscow for days, submerged too deep, running too long to maintain radio contact. The men on board do not know and have no way of finding out whether the war everyone has been bracing for has already begun somewhere above them. Then the depth charges start landing against the hull. What the crew doesn't know, what nobody had any way of telling them, is that these are American signaling charges, a prearranged, deliberately non-lethal method the U.S. Navy uses to force a submarine to surface for identification. Washington had communicated this intention through diplomatic channels days earlier, specifically to avoid this exact kind of catastrophic misunderstanding. That message never reached B-59. To the men inside that hull, exhausted, overheated, oxygen-starved, isolated from any information beyond the explosions they can feel through the metal around them, there is only one reasonable conclusion. The war has started, and it has started with an attack on them specifically. Captain Valentin Savitsky believes it completely. He gives the order to prepare the nuclear torpedo for launch. Here's the mechanism the entire story turns on, and it comes down to 2 signatures against 1. On most Soviet submarines carrying a nuclear weapon, only 2 are required to authorize launch: the captain and the political officer. Both men are aboard B-59. Both agree the torpedo should fire. Under the normal protocol, that's enough. It isn't enough on this boat. Archipov's rank as Brigade Chief of Staff, the detail you were told to remember, outranks the ship's own captain in this specific chain of authority. A 3rd signature is legally required before that torpedo can be armed. It's his. Picture the actual space this argument happens in. A cramped conning tower, barely room to stand. Unbearable heat radiating off every surface. Sweat that won't evaporate in air this saturated. Men who haven't had reliable sleep or clean air in days. 2 of the 3 absolutely certain the world outside this hull is already burning, and the 3rd standing between them and a decision that cannot be undone once it's made. Savitsky is shouting. By every account, this is a man who has held his composure through days of pursuit and exhaustion, which is exactly why the shouting matters. Something in him has genuinely broken loose. Arkhipov doesn't shout back. He argues the way a man argues when he's already done the calculation and knows raising his voice won't change the math. He points to the pattern of the depth charges, landing to the side of the hull, not against it, spaced with a rhythm that reads as signaling rather than destruction, a detail that only means something if you've been trained to notice it. He has. He points to Soviet protocol itself. A nuclear weapon requires direct authorization from Moscow, and the absence of that authorization isn't proof it's been overridden by circumstance. It's proof they need to surface, establish contact, and find out what's actually happening before anyone commits an act that ends the possibility of finding out safely. He is asking 2 men who believe they are already living through the first hours of a nuclear war to accept that they might be wrong, using nothing but pattern recognition and procedure, with no way to prove it until they do exactly what he's asking. By the available reconstructions, the argument runs somewhere between several minutes and roughly an hour. Every one of those minutes spent by 3 exhausted men who each believe with equal conviction that they might already be living in a world at war, in a compartment where the only sounds are their own voices and the muffled thud of more charges landing against the hull outside. Savitsky relents. B-59 surfaces directly into the middle of an American destroyer formation. The crew identifies themselves. Contact is made. The submarine is permitted to withdraw, under American observation, back towards Soviet waters.
The torpedo that could have ended any hope of stopping what came after it is never armed, never fired. The war that both other men on that conning tower were certain had already started never starts at all. Here's the question worth sitting with before I tell you what happens to him next. If the system worked exactly as it was designed to, if the 3rd signature requirement did precisely the job it was built to do at precisely the moment it mattered most, what do you think the reward was for the man whose signature made the difference? The crew of B-59 returns to the Soviet naval base at Saida Bay in late December 1962, not to recognition, not to gratitude, quiet or otherwise, to reprimand. Soviet Naval Command is furious, not that a nuclear war was averted, but that a Soviet vessel had surfaced directly in front of the American Navy, exposed itself, identified itself, and withdrawn without firing a shot. None of the context matters to the officers reviewing this outcome. One admiral, addressing the returning crew directly, tells them it would have been better if they'd gone down with their ship. Sit with that sentence because it's the entire thesis of this video compressed in 9 words.
Not well done, not even silence, a direct statement to the men who prevented nuclear war that death would have been the preferable outcome. And it isn't only B-59's crew who comes home to this. Katov, Shumkov, and Dubivko, the three commanders who never had to face Archipov's exact decision because none of their own boats ever came within reach of it, returned to a Soviet naval command that treats the entire mission as an embarrassment to be minimized rather than a crisis narrowly survived. Whatever each of them privately understood about how close their flotilla had come to a nuclear exchange, none of it becomes something the Navy wants spoken about. The silence that swallows Archipov's story swallows theirs too. 4 men, 4 boats, one shared understanding of what nearly happened, and precisely 0 institutional interest in ever revisiting it. Archipov's wife, Olga, says later that he rarely spoke about what happened aboard B-59, not from shame, but because he felt that what he and his crew had actually done was never properly understood, let alone appreciated by the people who had sent them into that situation in the first place. By her account, he regarded refusing the launch order as nothing more than the correct application of naval protocol under pressure. Not heroism, just doing the job correctly. The institution he served never shared that framing, and for 4 decades, neither did anyone else outside a very small circle who already knew. The file on B-59 stays closed. It stays closed for reasons that have nothing to do with protecting state secrets and everything to do with protecting reputations. The incident implicates Savitsky, who very nearly fired a nuclear weapon based on a misreading that better communication could have prevented. It implicates the entire chain of command that sent 4 nuclear-armed submarines into the most volatile standoff of the Cold War, with no reliable way to reach them once they submerged. It implicates the protocols themselves, protocols that came within a single dissenting vote of catastrophic failure, a fact nobody in Soviet naval leadership has any interest in advertising, especially not during the decades of Cold War that still remain. In 1997, 35 years after B-59 surfaced, the 4 surviving commanders of that flotilla gather for a conference in the United States. The first time any of them speak publicly, together, about what happened that October. Savitsky is already dead by this point. He never gets to give his own account. What the surviving 3 offer is careful, incomplete, visibly weighed against decades of institutional habit. Arkhipov is there, presenting what becomes in effect the closest thing to an official version of the story anyone will hear from a direct participant. He confirms the broad shape of events. He does not use the word nuclear in his own presentation except once in passing reference to a journalist's earlier headline, as if even in a room of men who all know exactly what almost happened, the word itself still carries a weight none of them are fully willing to say out loud. 40 years pass before anyone outside that room gets the full story. Not because the men who lived it forgot, because the files stayed exactly where the Navy left it, until 2002, when it finally cracks open and the world hears for the first time what almost happened on that conning tower. By then, he has already been dead for 4 years, killed, according to his family and his doctors, by cancer traced back to the radiation exposure he absorbed aboard K-19 in 1961. The same act of quiet, uncredited sacrifice. A completely different institutional silence. Decades apart. Both eventually broken, far too late for the man at the center of either story to hear what the world had finally come to understand about him. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute establishes an award specifically to recognize actions that protect humanity's long-term future, taken at great personal risk, with no expectation of reward or recognition. Vasily Arkhipov receives the very first one, posthumously. His daughter, Elena, accepts it on his behalf, in a ceremony her father never lived to see, for an act her father never considered remarkable enough to talk about at length, even when he had the chance, in that room in 1997, surrounded by the only other men alive who understood exactly what he'd done, and exactly what it had cost him to do it. Institutions do not remember who held the line. They remember who followed orders cleanly enough not to embarrass them afterward. Vasily Arkhipov held the line at the single moment in modern history when holding it mattered more than almost anywhere else it's ever been tested. And the reward for doing exactly what his country's own safeguards were built to make him do was contempt, followed by 40 years of silence, followed by a medal his daughter had to accept for him, because he never lived to hear his own name spoken as anything other than an inconvenience. That's the pattern this channel exists to find. Not the missiles, not the machines, not the dates everyone already half remembers from a textbook. The people underneath them. The ones institutions used and then quietly wrote out of their own history the moment it stopped being convenient to remember them. Every video here is built the same way. Real sources, no invented quotes, no comfortable version of the past. If this story made you sit back for a second and actually think about what close meant in October of 1962, that's not an accident. Subscribe if you want the next one found before it disappears for good, the same way this one very nearly did.